Fed press conference starts in a little under 4 hours. Here are some things that you need to know going into it. First, Nick T is suggesting that is the Fed losing the plot with the dots? This is a reference to the dot plot, which the dot plot is really just this on the FOMC's projection material. The last projection material we had was from March 2025, and they really show that the median doesn't really see rates getting down to about 3% until the longer run, which could be 2028 or on, given that 27, 26, and 25 are charted here. And so you see this sort of like very slow decline here in the dot plot. However, Nick T appropriately suggests that in June of 2024, they suggested there would be just 3 cuts, in the 2 months prior, they suggested that there would be 3 25 basis point cuts, and they reduced that to 1 cut in June of 2024. So they were only expecting to do 1 negative 25 basis point move in June. So June 2024, just to visualize that, they say negative 0.25% coming in 2024, okay? Literally, a few months later, the actual move is negative 1%, so 4 cuts in 2024. Now, a lot of this was heavily driven by the extension of the longer-term unemployed. So if we do 27 weeks unemployed, or we look at unemployment numbers that we were getting, we started seeing some real issues in the summer of last year. Now, some people say, Kevin, you don't have to worry about the charts. The only thing you have to worry about is the fact that an election was coming up and Powell didn't want a Trump because of fear that he could end up getting fired. There's possibly some truth to that. But there's also some truth in the data that the level of unemployed, long-term unemployed, was skyrocketing, especially in May to June of last year, to July, August, September. We really saw this long-term unemployed level rise substantially. It wasn't until the election and election enthusiasm that we saw a decline in that long-term unemployed. We did get a spike during Liberation, but that has also once again settled down. So we've kind of become a little bit range-bound on this long-term unemployed chart, which is good. We don't really want to see the more than 6-month unemployed level rise, as it's usually a leading indicator of a recession. Again, that's something we generally don't want. If you refresh the chart here, you can see that a little bit more broadly, that usually the beginning leading turn up is where you get sort of the lead into recession. And then, of course, once the recession is underway, that's when it skyrockets out of control, typically peaking out actually at the end of a recession. And this is why recessions are so frustrating to predict with employment numbers, because employment numbers just lag so heavily, especially unemployment claim numbers. By the time they start skyrocketing, it's really too late. And that's likely why the Federal Reserve chose to give us 4 cuts in 2024 to get ahead of some of that labor market weakness that we were seeing. And it wasn't just in the unemployment claims, but it was also in the BLS labor surveys suggesting, okay, once we start getting fewer than 100,000 jobs per month, we might be in a place where we're going to start revising into a recessionary level. However, this is now leading Nick T to cast some shade on the dot plot and the use of it. Totally fair. But what it does is it gives you a snapshot of where the Fed's brain is at the time using current data. The data that really came into color in August and September was labor data that we didn't have in June of 2024 yet. So is it possible that this year is not different and we end up getting the same cuts as we had last year, where the Fed, in my opinion, the Fed is likely today, so I'm going to write this down because I like writing down my predictions, because even if I'm wrong, at least I have the balls to give you a prediction. I think it's likely the Fed's going to project somewhere around 40 basis points of cuts this year. And if you think about that, that's kind of between 1 to 2 cuts, slightly more likely to be 2 cuts, right? Because 50 basis points is 2 cuts, 25 is 1, midpoint would be 37.5. So you go with 40, a little bit more likely to get 2 cuts projected this year. That's sort of a way you could evaluate this in a numerical manner. Now we'll see. This is the last FOMC dot plot, and Nick T also points out most of the time I regret having to fill out the summary of economic projections, says Neil Kashkari. Doesn't so much matter though, because we are going to be getting a new chart like this. And again, the timing for this is the presser will be at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Actually, this is when we will get the announcement and we'll get the dots. So this will be dots and rate decision, which is almost certainly going to be a nothing burger. So rates will hold steady and we'll get the letter. And then, of course, at 11:30, we'll have the actual press event. Now, what are we looking for in terms of changes in this chart? Well, in my opinion, what we're going to be looking for is right here in unemployment rate. We want to see if the Fed, it would be negative to see the Fed suggest that this could move up, although I don't think the Fed has any real catalyst to suggest that it absolutely will move up, so maybe this will be a nothing burger. And then you have PCE inflation. This is personal consumption expenditures, which would require some pull through. I'm actually going to go in here and I'm going to suggest that that might actually end up being lower. So I'm going to give you my guess for some of these numbers. I'm going to go and suggest that the Fed's going to go and lower this to 2.6. I think it's possible that the Fed might say, hey, we might be willing to take a 4.5 on the unemployment rate by the end of the year. GDP probably mostly stable. If anything, honestly, they'll probably revise this up to 1.8 or 1.9. We'll see. So far, no signs of big damage from tariffs. And then over here on the projected policy rate, wouldn't surprise me to see that instead of projecting a little bit more than 2 cuts, you end up projecting slightly fewer cuts. So maybe around that 4.1, that would be about 40 basis points down, which lines up with the number that I just gave you. So these are some of the numbers that I would be looking for today. And then I would also want to see limited deterioration here. So this section right here you want to pay attention to. This is the potential that individual board members are starting to panic about unemployment. And if you start seeing some of these higher end numbers range up, then you potentially start getting into an environment where some of the Fed board members are starting to panic about the potential of unemployment rocketing up. Though I don't see conditions for that just yet. And to me, you probably have a broadly bullish result. I mean, absent actual strikes or deterioration and further negotiations with Iran, it seems likely that 8 out of 10 times you end up having a green day on the Fed day. Now, we already have quite a bit of green priced in. You got Tesla up 2.6, recovering some of yesterday's pain. Recovered that 318 level. You got the Qs slowly relaxing a little bit pre-Fed meeting. Not uncommon. You usually tend to bounce in the Fed meeting, so I'm not sure that this is terribly unusual. But those are sort of my expectations for the Fed today, and we'll see what happens. Obviously, we'll be live. We'll be doing Fed bingo on it. I think broadly, this is going to be mostly a nothing burger for the Federal Reserve. You're going to be in a position of, hey, we're going to wait and see, wait for the data. Totally makes sense. We're just now getting May data, right? It's still really early in this data cycle. So when we actually start getting real numbers, it's going to be July, August, September again. And, that's when we get back to school hiring, Q3, Q4 seasonal hiring. We'll get earnings reports for Q2 as well as guidance, although so far it seems like companies are revising up their guidance rather than down. So broadly, market seems bullish, which doesn't call for cuts. Now, I know Donald Trump is calling for cuts. This morning at his presser, and you can see this in the Meet Kevin app as well. But this morning we had, Trump just now on Powell. Rates should be 2% lower. Well, sure, it's easy to say 2% lower because it's populist and that's what people want. But it doesn't consider the potential for inflation to rip again. I don't think that's personally very likely, but the Fed can't take that gamble. So here's what it looks like on the app. And you can change the colors if you don't like it, but you should download this app. It's nice and convenient. Meet Kevin app in Apple and Android. But rates should be 2% lower. Powell has done a poor job. He probably won't cut today. If the Fed would lower rates, we would buy debt for a lot less. 0.1% chance the Fed cuts 25 basis points today. That's the statistic on it. And see, that's where I say, you know, call it about 40 basis points of cuts by the end of the year. Trump wants 200 basis points of cuts now. The only way that's really likely is if you start seeing poopy doopies in the labor market, which, you know, could be on their way. But then again, you know, we had some labor market scare at the end of last year, or you know, third quarter of last year, and they recovered with the election optimism. So, you know, maybe that was our soft landing. So that said, that gives us a little bit of perspective on El Fedo.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.